My journey to diagnosis started in 2001. I hadn't had a PAP for a few years for various reasons, from not having insurance to body issues. I went in after having an issue with my arm to an emergency room. The doctor asked me a simple question: when was your last physical exam? And I really had to think about it. He referred me to a great doctor. Thankfully, that doctor was thorough. I went in thinking she would tell me, you need to lose weight, these are the things, not thinking that I would come out with a cancer diagnosis, but I did. So in April of 2001, at age 25, I was diagnosed with advanced cervical cancer. When I was first diagnosed with cervical cancer, I didn't even know that it was linked to HPV. And once I realized it, I was ashamed. I felt that people would look at me a different way. Once I started researching it and I found out how common it was and speaking to other women who had it and knowing that they felt the same way, I said, wait a minute, we shouldn't feel this way. But the truth is, society has us feeling this way. And I think that's another reason why more women aren't talking about cervical cancer. And I feel like when we don't talk about cervical cancer, we're not helping someone else prevent cervical cancer. I think doctors need to make people feel comfortable that it's not about someone cheating. It's not something about someone sleeping around. It's a common virus. It's a virus that happens. It's a virus that could happen to anyone in this room. It's a virus that could happen to anyone watching me right now. It's a virus that happens. And it's about catching the virus early, preventing it, and we have to break down stigmas. We really do. Because the longer that we keep stigmas up is the longer that people will die from cervical cancer. I remember before I was diagnosed, I never heard about HPV. I didn't know what the human papillomavirus was until I had cervical cancer. We live in a time now where people are talking about HPV. They're talking about cervical cancer, even in presidential debates. And it's important that women know what it is, what it causes, and what questions to ask. If women really want to empower themselves, go in and say, hey, I've heard a lot about HPV lately. I want to ask, am I at risk for HPV? Should I be screened for it? With today's technology, no one really should be dying from cervical cancer. I look back and I think about when I was diagnosed and there was only the Pap test. And the Pap test was a great invention. I mean, cervical cancer was the #1 killer of women before the Pap test came around. But the Pap alone isn't enough. You have to really use current and the most recent technology to end this war on cervical cancer, and that includes using HPV testing. There are many types of HPV, but what your doctor really needs to focus on is what type of HPV you have, especially if they're the high-risk types of the human papillomavirus, because those are the ones that cause cervical cancer. So you really need to know what you're dealing with, and that's where the most recent technology comes into play. Women need to know every year, go in and get your well women exam. I think when we start telling women, well, if you've had a clear Pap, go in 3 years, or if this happened, do this, do that. When you go in and you get a well women's exam, it's not just about your Pap, it's about your overall health. And while with cervical cancer we focus on the Pap and HPV testing, I think we're doing women a disservice telling them to wait, because I think most of us know women are busy, they're the head of their households, they're juggling multiple things. If you tell me wait to go in 3 years, I'm probably going to wait to go in 5 or 6. And cervical cancer is a slow progressing, but the damages that it does, it's too hard. This is what I've learned after surviving cervical cancer for 10 years. Fighting cervical cancer is really, really hard. It's so unbelievably hard. And I did it, but it's hard. But the thing is, preventing it, it's very easy. It's very exciting that we have HPV vaccines, and while that's really exciting, we still need to be tested for HPV, because right now those vaccines are only FDA approved for those 9 to age 26, and we have a lot of women who are over 26 that need to be tested. So even though we have a vaccine, you must continue to get your Pap and HPV tests. I started my organization, Tamika and Friends, because I never wanted any survivor to feel alone. We have this saying at Tamika and Friends that we each have two shoulders, so that's a lot of shoulders to help push a woman through a diagnosis. You go through a lot. You want to make sure that you have someone to hold your hand or be there to say, it's okay. And even if, for some reason, you don't beat this cancer, you have someone to say, you fought as hard as you could, and we'll be there with you until the end. It's important to me to continue this fight because I do believe together we can end cervical cancer. And I'm looking forward to the one day where we won't need an organization like mine, because I know with this technology that one day we will eradicate cervical cancer. Thank you, Roche, so much for everything that you do. Know that behind every test you sell, there's a woman who could be diagnosed with HPV or finding out that she has high-risk cervical cancer because of it. Keep doing what you do, because one day together we will end cervical cancer.